The workshop tonight is, I think, honestly, it's one of the most important workshops that we could do. The reason why, like, I really wanted to translate a clear message by this because, I mean, honestly, it's like when you hear workshop, chiropractic history, it's like, well, you know, why do I care about chiropractic history? I mean, I just go to get my neck cracked and, you know, my back fixed and stuff like that, or I had headaches and all that, you know, so why do I really care about the history, right? What's so important about the history? But my goal with you tonight is to show you not just, you know, it's not about the history, you know, in terms of like, let's show you what granddaddy did, right? That's not the point. It's really, you're gonna see why things are the way that they are. And I'm telling you, like, there is so much behind the history of chiropractic and how it's defined healthcare in this nation and the world. That's really my goal, is so that your mind is kind of blown like, wow, holy moly, I did not understand. I didn't realize that there was that much behind why we do everything the way that we do now. But that's literally the way that everything unfolds. And it's really important because of like this quote right here: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. You know, and I'm gonna summarize everything on the end as far as how does the past, how do we not repeat that stuff in the future, and how do we really transition healthcare so that we don't continue to do the same thing. And that's kind of going to be a good summary. Of course, the irony is, you know, we've got multiple, you know, chiropractic families in here, if you will. And so, you know, that part in particular is really, I think, going to help you see the big picture overall. So we're going to start all the way back at the beginning from 1847. And the reason why is we got to go all the way back to when the American Medical Association was formed. Okay, and you've got to understand the expressed reason for forming the American Medical Association was to increase physicians' income by restricting new practitioner competition. Okay, that's the purpose in forming an association. Think about it. Why do you form a homeowners association? Right? It's to protect the neighborhood, right? You form a homeowners association so you don't have somebody come in and paint their house blue and have chickens running all over your yard and you know, and having all this ruckus, and you know, like we have
on the blocks.
We have some of those houses here in Mobile where they've got the Tin Man like out on the right. You know, you drive down the road and you see these just weird things like all over the yard. It's scattered with trash. That's why you have a homeowners association, to protect the neighborhood. Okay. Well, this is why, because, and we got to even have a little bit of background on that, because you got to understand, up until this time, there were basically two layers of doctors. There were the allopaths and there were the naturopaths, okay? And they were pretty much on the same plane. They were about a 50-50 split. So, you know, there was even a well-known irony, you know, that went where the allopaths would say, don't worry about the treatment because the disease will kill you. And then the naturopaths said, don't worry about the disease because the treatment will kill you, right? So they had these opposing paradigms where they would go back and forth and they would say these things at each other, and they were kind of leveraging back and forth. But up until that time, you got to remember, doctors, what did they used to do? It's called house calls. Right? You know, you would go and you would call the doctor, and the doctor would show up, you know, and I mean, mechanics don't even make house calls today, right? So, but that used to be the norm. Doctors would actually show up. It wasn't necessarily a high prestige position being a doctor, okay? Until the AMA was formed, because they knew that in order to increase revenues, they had to get selective. Right? We had to create standards where not anybody could come in and call themselves a doctor. So we had to exclude a lot of the competition. So the AMA was formed really to do just that, and to leverage, you know, start to gain some power and some political gains over the, you know, this back and forth that was going between the naturopaths and the allopaths. Fast forward to 1849, just 2 years after the American Medical Association was formed, now you see this Public Advisory Board on Quack Remedies come out, okay? Is it surprising? I mean, think about it. If you were an association, then that would be one of the first strategic things that you do is create a quack board. Because now you can go directly after your competition, right? You can start labeling different things quackery and start eliminating different fields out of your view. So this was in 1849. This was well before the formation of chiropractic. This was already happening. So they were going after, you know, anything that didn't fall within the realm of typical allopathic medicine, which at the time you got to think was bloodletting and, you know, leeches and mercury and, you know, chemotherapy and radiation and stuff like that really wasn't a big part of the picture at this point. Okay, so now you fast forward to 1882. This was when the developer, Bartlett Joshua Palmer, that's BJ, and I'm throwing out these. You're going to see I'm throwing out, you know, kind of labeling these different characters and the different groups and everything early, so you don't get confused on all the names, because, you know, if I just said Palmer, you might be confused. So BJ is born to the discoverer Daniel David Palmer, or D.D. Palmer. Okay, so BJ was a son, D.D. was a father. Before he was a healer, D.D. was a lumberjack, a teacher, and a grocer selling fish on the street. Okay, and so, you know, at the time, you can imagine, you know, this guy decides later on to become a magnetic healer before he became a chiropractor. And so they would label, you know, of course, the opposing, you could see them saying, well, here's this grocer, this guy that peddled fish on the street, that's now calling himself a doctor. You know, but if you think about that, is that really that big of a deal? Because, you know, I was a pizza box folder, a home audio technician, a salad bar keeper, and a table busser before I became a chiropractor. Right? You know, these are just jobs that we had. You know, the bottom line is he was a working man, okay, and he did what was necessary to take care of his family. This is one of the only early pictures. This is Dee Dee, Santa Claus right there, before his beard turned white, right? And then this is BJ right there, just a little guy at the time. So we go forward a little bit further, 1885. So this was really the same year, or not 1895 is when chiropractic was officially discovered, but in 1885, when BJ was only 3 years old, his mother falls ill and dies. Okay, so this kind of plays into, and you can see the family dynamics that happen here. You know, he did not have his mom growing up. In fact, he had 6 different moms because his father was actually married 6 times in all. And there was not a real good relationship between BJ and his father, because there was rumors of, you know, Dee Dee beating the kids, and you know, he had all the different wives and everything, and who knows what goes into all that. But we know that Dee Dee was consumed with work. You know, he lived to work. Anybody know somebody like that, right? So things get crazy. 1886, Dee Dee begins his career as a magnetic healer. Okay, now in 1894, this was just 8 years in. Okay, that's a pretty significant length of time, but this is one of the only you know, residual documents that we have from that time, you know, little writings that is still available. But in 1894, this was just a random medical doctor that wrote, "A crank on magnetism has a crazy notion that it can cure the sick and crippled with his magnetic hands. His victims are the weak-minded, ignorant, and superstitious, those foolish people who have been sick for years and have become tired of the regular physician and want health by the shortcut method. He has certainly profited by the ignorance of his victims. His increase in business shows what can be done in Davenport, even by a quack." This article was written during a time when morphine and mercury-based cures were standard care in medicine. But, you know, I read that. Can you not see that same kind of thing be written in 2015? I mean, not much has changed. You can literally hear those kind of things still going on in the background. I mean, we have patients that still go and they get told these things by medical doctors, or, you know, by a family member. You know, we still hear these kind of things after all this time. You know, and really what it boils down to is this: this guy was successful. Okay, he had been in practice for 8 years, and you can look back. He started off with 1 room in a building, and then he went to 2 rooms in the building, and then he went to 4, and then he had the whole floor, and then he had the whole building. He must have been doing something. You know, he was successful in what he was doing enough to where there was word getting out. And that was before chiropractic. That was just magnetic healing, and I don't even know what that was. I don't know what he did. You know, But whatever he was doing, it was working and he was getting people well. He was probably dealing with nutrition. He was probably dealing with lifestyle stuff, right? So that was about 8 years in, and in 1895, it's reported that Dee adjusts Harvey Lillard, okay? Harvey Lillard was, and there's even a little bit of funny backstory with this, because this is the well-known story, you know, that in 1895 he adjusted Harvey Lillard, and he felt a lump in his thoracic spine and adjusted it, and his hearing came back, right? But the funny thing is you know, there's not really a direct connection between your thoracic spine and hearing, that cervical spine. Well, BJ, I've actually listened to the audio where BJ is talking about the fact that his dad actually wrote thoracic spine because he was so paranoid. And when you read a lot of Dee's stuff, and you'll see as we go through this, he was paranoid about other people taking chiropractic, which BJ ultimately did, right? And so he didn't want the science to be passed for somebody else. In fact, it was so protected that he would only allow the patient to be in the room. And at one point, it's said that he caught a family member looking through a mirror out from the hallway, looking through the mirror, watching what he was doing, and so he took down all the mirrors in his office because he didn't want anybody taking chiropractic, because he discovered it, right? And he didn't quite understand it yet. So anyways, BJ says that he wrote thoracic spine, but it was actually cervical spine, and he knew it. He just didn't want to reveal the family recipe, right? So, but it even goes beyond that. In fact, Harvey Lillard's niece or granddaughter or daughter or something like that, she even contests that that it really didn't go down that way. Like he hadn't been deaf for a long time or something like that. That he was actually standing in the hallway and telling a joke to another guy, and Dee came up and started, just talking to him and everything. And when he hit the punchline of the joke, Dee took his big old thick book that he was reading and slapped him in the back with it. And he felt something pop, and his hearing kind of went out. And so Dee said, "Oh, let me fix that," and he had been practicing on chickens and went in and adjusted him, and it worked. And his hearing cleared up. That story, honestly, is a little bit more believable and a little bit more true. But, that's what happens with history. The stories get changed, right? The funny thing is X-ray was discovered by Wilhelm Röntgen in Germany, which won the Nobel Prize in 1901, also in the same year. And, it's really interesting how these two technologies coincide, because without X-ray, there would be no chiropractic, okay? And you'll see that come into play here. In 1896, Dee opens up the Palmer School of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. BJ was 13 years old at the time, so he was only 3 years older than my oldest right now, when this happened. And, you can imagine he opens up a school and he starts teaching and he starts doing all these things. You can imagine how his relationship was with his son. It probably was not all that, all that uppity. He was consumed with this new thing and developing an entire new profession, while his stepmother, who obviously got divorced from, took care of the kids. So you can see how all that was going. Two of the first students were actually MDs. Okay, 2 of the first 6 students were MDs of the time, practicing medical doctors. Okay, that's really important as well. 1899, just three years later, Heinrich Matthey, MD of Davenport, starts an attack campaign against Palmer to create a state statute preventing anyone but an MD from practicing. So what happened here? They start training chiropractors and people start talking about chiropractic. The local doctors get upheaved. They say, no, you can't start taking our patients. And obviously there's at ends anyways philosophically, right? And the philosophy wasn't even there yet. I mean, literally, none of that was here yet, okay? This is in the early, literally they just knew you move the bone, the patient gets well. None of the philosophy had really been fully developed yet, okay? They just knew one thing: when we move the bone, something happens and the patients get well. That's pretty cool. Let's start teaching it to other people. Well, they didn't like this, so the campaign prompts schools, get this, nationwide to start developing accreditation standards. Look at our school system now. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. You see how things start to, how literally this is start to reshape the way we do everything. This is where accreditation standards started, was a direct attack on chiropractic. Before that, there was nothing. There was no medical standard. There was no chiropractic standard. There was nothing. It was just, okay, we're going to lose this war because these guys are getting them well. So we need to start locking this thing down. And so we're going to start creating another system to push everybody else out. Okay? Go for 1901. 2 years later, state medical boards are now established in almost every state in the U.S., requiring a diploma from an AMA, American Medical Association, approved medical college in order to attain a license. If you don't have a degree from an AMA approved school, you don't get a license to practice. Now that you have licenses in place, what happens if you don't have a license? You can get arrested, right? Okay? So in the same year, the John D. Rockefeller Foundation creates, John D. Rockefeller created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, okay? This institute, if you're not familiar with it, is behind all kinds of medical research. John D. Rockefeller actually saw that he helped the formation of a lot of these medical organizations. He helped fund chemotherapy and radiation therapy and drugs. They developed, I believe, the first antibiotic. They were behind all kinds of stuff. Lots of money poured into. I mean, this was all steel money getting poured in. So this was money being funneled into the medical system at the same time that chiropractic was trying to get developed. Okay, just so you see, David, Goliath. Okay, I mean this was the battle that was happening. 1902, BJ graduates from Palmer at 20 years of age. Young guy, right? So very young when it all started, and he comes in and he starts learning directly from his father. 1903, the second chiropractic school opens in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, by Dr. Solon Langworthy, one of Palmer's first class. So this was not one of the 2 medical doctors, but he was one of the original 6 in the class. So he starts the second school, and they, obviously they've got a decent relationship, because he was one of the original students. So there wasn't really a lot of rough stuff going there. And you don't really see a whole lot go out past that. 1904, Oakley Smith is the first to be licensed as a drugless healer under the Illinois Medical Practice Act. So this was a big moment because he wasn't necessarily, I don't even know that he was a chiropractor, but he was licensed as a drugless healer. And so this opened up a legal porthole that could now be looked at for chiropractors in every other state, right? So this becomes the entry point to make it legal and start to, every time that, throughout history, every time that they do something to shut everybody else out, somebody finds a way to start to pop back up and pop back in, right? When there's organized, intelligent people, that's usually you'll find a way to fight back or at least try. 1906, the AMA's Council on Medical Education creates a list of unacceptable schools to reduce graduates in healthcare. This is not just chiropractic schools. This is medical schools, okay? So they basically go through and they start purging out all of these different schools and institutions all over the country and eliminating competition. So now all you have is big schools, big institutions that can really start to guard and protect what's being taught. Because until then, if you wanted to open up a school, over in Mississippi, nobody's going to stop you. You want to go out to California, you want to go out to Mexico, I mean, wherever, you can go out and you can start a school. There's no regulation anywhere. So there are schools all over the place. Some of them have 3 students, some of them have 1,000 students. But there was no way to regulate it, okay? So they came in and they started wiping out the unacceptable schools. Same year, Dr. Langworthy, the one that opened up the second school, he publishes his first book on chiropractic titled Modernized Chiropractic, establishing the brain as the life force of the body. Okay, he was the first one, not Palmer. He was the first one that really wrote and documented that the brain was the life force of the body. The term subluxation came from that book. Okay, do you know that word is actually now being used by medical doctors? Like in the last year, I've seen multiple occurrences where I've gotten MRI reports, X-ray reports, and the term subluxation is in there. The first time I saw it, I swore, I was like, come on, they got to be messing with me. They knew this was coming to a chiropractor, because I could not believe I saw the word subluxation there, but they're starting to use it. The term subluxation, and just, by the way, does everybody know what subluxation is? Okay, if you don't know, a subluxation is a misalignment of the vertebra. So break the word down. Sub means less than. Luxation is a dislocation. So what is a subluxation? It's anything less than a complete dislocation. Okay? So even the idea that subluxation doesn't exist, do you see how ridiculous a notion that is? Because literally what that's saying is your joint is either completely in place or it's completely dislocated. There is no gray area in between. Right? So that crick in your neck, you're completely imagining it. Because if it's not dislocated, then it's impossible. It can't be out of alignment. And that's what that means when they say subluxation doesn't exist. And the reason why they say that is because it's not backed by a double-blind placebo-controlled study. Yet, has anybody in here ever had a crick in their neck? Do you need a double-blind controlled study to know that it's there?
No.
No. Yeah. You know it's there and you know when it's fixed. So the term subluxation effectively brings chiropractic into the scientific arena because now we have the ideas that we can start to build upon, right? Before that, it was really just, you know, these vague construes and who knows? I mean, really, who knows what it was until there was some science put behind it and some actual anatomy put behind what was actually happening. Before that, it was DD cranking on some levers, right? He was using the spinous processes and transverse processes as levers. That's what he was saying, okay? BJ assumes control of PSC, Palmer School of Chiropractic, okay? So anywhere you see PSC, that's Palmer School of Chiropractic. He assumes control of that at that point, takes it over from DD. In 1907, attorney Tom Morris legally differentiates for the first time chiropractic from osteopathy. Because what was happening is the osteopaths, medical practitioners, were saying that the chiropractors were practicing medicine without a license. Okay? So for the first time, he used Langworthy's book to prove that chiropractic was not osteopathy and went after it on the basis of philosophy. See, our philosophy is this, their philosophy is that. Therefore, we're not doing the same thing. And you know what? It worked. And they said chiropractic is a different thing. And they ruled it. So guess what? One in the pocket, right? We know what works now. So that could then be replicated. He freed Shekatoro Morikobu, who is also one of the original 6 Palmer graduates. Okay, he was the one that was on trial. He is acquitted of charges of unlicensed practice of medicine, therefore reshaping legal distinction for the profession. So at that point, they had legal reason and justification because it was one in one court. Now we can use that in other courts to say, no, it's different based on philosophy. Now do you see why philosophy is so important in chiropractic? Okay? Have you ever wondered that? Why is the philosophy? Why do chiropractors talk about the philosophy? Why do they? Have you ever heard your medical doctor preach on the philosophy of medicine? Like it's a big thing? No, they don't need to. But see, chiropractic, the only reason we still exist today is because of what? The philosophy. And you know what chiropractors are trying to do? Say that the philosophy is outdated and, you know, and no good and doesn't need to be talked about. We need to just focus on science and become back pain doctors. That's what's happening right now because we're forgetting our past. We're forgetting what happened, and the only reason we have legal distinction is because of the philosophy. So this is not the picture you know. This is just another picture of another doctor literally adjusting in a prison cell. And you'll see how prominent this was, but California was actually said to have, their jails had more chiropractic adjusting tables sequestered than any other state in the U.S. I mean, they would, every time they would go in and raid a chiropractor's office, they would steal their tables, and the chiropractor would build another one as soon as they got out and go back to work, right? So they had this huge stockpile of chiropractic adjusting tables. 1910, Big year. The Flexner Report, financed by the Carnegie Foundation. Anybody heard of Andrew Carnegie? Okay, more big money coming in. It closes hundreds of private medical and homeopathic schools and names Johns Hopkins. Who in here has heard of that? Johns Hopkins becomes the model school. This establishes the first nonprofit, federally subsidized, university-based hospital, which effectively gains control of all federal research and student aid dollars in the U.S. Okay? That's when the power grab came in. Okay? All makes sense now, doesn't it? Okay? Also, from his studies now in Oregon, I don't know why it was in Oregon, but from Oregon, D.D. Palmer theorizes that nerves control health. So we know that the brain is innate, but the nerves, now the science is there, they're starting to understand that the nerves actually transmit that life from the brain to the body. It's starting to come together, right? The research and the understanding of anatomy and physiology is starting to come into play. This was his most important green book, The Chiropractic Adjuster. And if you don't know what the green books are, most of you probably don't. The green books are a volume of books that literally are probably this wide. Okay, it's all the philosophy, all the great early books from chiropractic. Most of them are written by B.J. Palmer. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more too, but huge volume of writing. B.J. especially was just a ridiculous writer. B.J. introduces spinography in 1910, x-rays for the first time at PSE, resulting in a significant exodus of the more straight faculty and students. And by straight, I don't mean what you're thinking. Straight is a difference between, we call it straights versus mixers. Okay? What that means, your straight chiropractors are the ones that just think that you just adjust. That's all you do. You're a purist, right? You adjust, you move the bone, nothing else. You don't talk nutrition, you don't talk exercise, you don't talk PT, none of that stuff. If you do any of that, you're a mixer. And you have no business. Well, the biggest straight chiropractor was B.J. Palmer. I mean, so much that he was constantly attacking all the other schools, saying that they were mixing, and that the only pure, real chiropractic is coming from Palmer, because that's where D.D. started the school. That's where chiropractic comes from. So all the other ones are mixers. That's the only straight school. So here he's preaching all this stuff, but at the same time, B.J. was a visionary. He understood, and when he saw that spinography, as he called it, x-rays, was the means to what? Correction and understanding of the spine, which we're supposed to be experts in, he knew that's where it had to go. And so he wasn't bound down by his title as being a straight chiropractor. He knew that's where the innovation was. And so guess what? He jumped on it. And now all the others who were just, well, you know, we just are what we are. You know, they all purged from the school. And so they had this massive exodus out of the school, and they started splitting off into other directions. You'll see a lot of that in chiropractic. With only 12,000 practicing chiropractors in the United States at that time, there are now more than 15,000 prosecutions for practicing medicine without a license. Did you hear that? There's more prosecutions than there are doctors. Okay? This is what they survived through, these early guys. That's why, you know, when chiropractors look at this, we say we walk on the shoulders of giants. You know, you think the David and Goliath thing. No, we see these are giants because, I mean, they were hardcore. One guy, he is known, and he actually just died in like 2000. He was known as the most jailed chiropractor in the history of chiropractic. You know, I mean, he spent more time in jail practically than he did adjusting because he was adamant he was not going to, like, go ahead, put me in jail. I'm going to get out and I'm going to go right back to doing it again. And now that was kind of a vehicle. And then they said at some point, you know what? By paying your fine, you know, you're actually helping the system. You know, you're handing them money. So that's not the right way to do it. We need to start fighting back. We need to do it the right way in court. Don't just let them arrest you and then pay your fine to get out. They could afford it. You know, they were doing well at that time. There were no taxes, right? So those didn't come into play until the 1930s. So at this point, this is when the really gained into power, the Universal Chiropractic Association, the UCA, this is going to get really confusing. The UCA successfully defends 80% of them on the basis of what? Philosophy. Philosophy saved chiropractic in its early years. You get that? That's a big picture. That's why it's so important. This picture, this is one of the only pictures that you can actually find of BJ standing in front of a spinography unit. And it's incredible. You think we're advanced because we put a head clamp on you? You should see the old pictures. You know, they don't have any of BJ, but they have these people like strapped in. I mean, they've got clamps around their arms, around their shoulders, around their neck, around their head. I mean, they are clamped into place so that they can get replicated x-rays. I mean, BJ was precise. He developed the science of chiropractic. I mean, unbelievable amount of research. So that's one of the few pictures that's available. 1911, letter from D.D. Palmer to P.W. Johnson, D.C. at PSC, Palmer State College, suggests chiropractic move to become a religion with himself as a fountainhead. Has anybody ever heard this before? That chiropractic was a religion? Okay? You got to understand where this came from, though. The reason he said is it was in order to, well, I think part of it was because of this. It was in order to have an easier legal path because he saw the Christian Scientist revolution coming into play. He was watching the Christian Scientists, they developed, and I mean, they just took off, and they were growing and growing and growing, and money was pouring in, and everything was good, because they were a religion. So they were outside of the realm of legal battles. So Dede, he looks at this group of Christian Scientists, and he's like, look, here we are, we're wasting our time, paying all this money in battles, fighting this war. Let's just make it a religion. You know what? I'm Jesus, right? I mean, that's literally what he said. He was like, I'm the fountainhead. I'm the guy that's just going to take everything over, and I'm where it all comes from. So just call me the head as Joseph Smith and all the other dudes. Let's call it a day. Let's go to work. But of course, that was not a good path to take chiropractic. Thank goodness that BJ and these other docs had the gonads to say that's not the right way to go. Okay, so this was also kind of around the time you can imagine where BJ and Dede started to really butt heads, because Dede was basically saying, I want chiropractic. It's mine, and I'm, this is the direction we need to take it. And his son said, no, I've got the college, and we're taking it this way. Okay, so 1912, things are good. BJ purchases the 22-room Palmer Mansion for $25,000 US, right? That seems like a lot of money for that big of a house now, right? The interesting thing, 4 U.S. presidents actually visited his personal residence during their presidency. Okay, I point that out because, you might think chiropractic was a small thing nowadays. I mean, you look at it and you're like, well, chiropractic has never had any kind of influence. But get that, 4 U.S. presidents visited his personal residence. That's the kind of attention that chiropractic was getting at that time. Before chemotherapy came into play, before radiation, before pharmaceuticals, before all this money started coming in and changing the whole game, that's the kind of rise that was coming with chiropractic. You see why there was so much contention. Okay, this was a major threat. When presidents are going to meet this guy, this is a major threat. 1913, Kansas passes the first chiropractic statute. Okay, so this is the first time that there's a statute in the state saying that chiropractors can be licensed. D.D. Palmer dies of typhoid fever at age 68. BJ is unjustly accused of patricide. If you get on and you look, that patricide means you killed your father, right? Okay, so here's the story. The story is, if you read some of the different content online and everything, you'll see that BJ Palmer ran over his dad in a parade. So here's BJ driving his car through the annual Palmer Parade down the middle of town in Davenport, and Dede comes running up to the car upset, yelling at BJ, because he stole chiropractic, and BJ says, drive over him, and runs the car over him and kills his dad there in the middle of public. That's how the story goes. Well, it didn't happen that way, and obviously there were actually they tried to bring charges against him, and it was thrown out of court. And they, like within a year, it had dissolved out and gone away. What had happened is, yes, he did come up, and apparently he was drunk when he did, and he was getting all riled and everything, and then he tripped over the curb and fell down and hurt himself. And then a week later, he happened to get typhoid fever, and he died from typhoid fever. But, you know, the people that were close to him that didn't like the direction that BJ and the Palmer School was going and where they were taking chiropractic, the opposing side, they wanted something to throw at him, so they said, BJ killed his father, right? That's how you splinter the group. So it was just internal dissent. So, see, what I'm pointing out, this wasn't all just medical, you know, bombarding chiropractic. This was coming internally too. It's the splintering and the fragmentation on the inside that kept it from growing early on as well. There we go a little further. 1914. By now, BJ had accumulated the largest and finest osteological collection in the entire world. Okay? Not small stuff. There were 4,392 skeletons, full skeletons. That is a lot of skeletons. I mean, that is a ton of skeletons. 13,697 specimens. This was the largest collection in the entire world. Medical institutions would send doctors from all over the world to visit the Palmer College to examine and learn from their osteological collection, because they would have every disease. I mean, every time they found some different deformity, they would acquire it and bring it in. Okay? So this was, again, not small stuff. This was big stuff. 1950, North Dakota and Arkansas become the first states to officially license chiropractors. Based on those statutes that were starting to pop up and become available, these were the first states to actually license chiropractors. So now it is legal. They have the legal ability to practice in that state. 1918 and 1922, big time. On the heels of the 1918 flu pandemic, are you guys aware of that? That was the Spanish flu, I believe. Okay, I mean, there was thousands upon thousands of deaths. And not to get into this real deep, but and I do believe it's in another workshop that's on YouTube. I go through the actual numbers of it, but chiropractors, yeah, it was in the Ebola workshop. If you want to go back and watch that, I go through the numbers on the 1918 and the research that was done during that time. And basically you show that while the medical system was losing all these patients under care, the chiropractors were documenting and showing that they were getting tremendously better results. I mean, they weren't hardly losing anybody just by treating them chiropractically. They were boosting their immune systems and people were getting well. So what happened is you had this huge surge of people flooding into the chiropractic clinics because, you know, everybody's sick, and this is where you go and you don't get sick. You don't die like everybody else. You know, you go this way, you die from the Spanish flu. You go this way, you get healed by the chiropractor. So there was this flood, this exodus, but it also just so happened that this was the end of World War I, and the U.S. government was paying tuition for returning veterans. So all these people were coming back, and their family members were getting cured by the chiropractor, and they said, well, I'm going to chiropractic school because the government pays for it. So to put this in perspective, enrollment at the Palmer Chiropractic College alone jumped to over 3,000 students, okay? The largest chiropractic college in the United States, in the world right now, is Life University, and their goal right now is to surpass 2,000 enrolled students. And what's the population of the globe now? Okay? You see, I mean, this is a big thing. I mean, that was a large number pouring into the chiropractic colleges at that time. Tuition was also fairly cheap. Back in the early 1900s, the tuition was, I believe it was $700. Now it's roughly $220,000. You know, so, you know, a little bit of a difference there as well. So you can imagine chiropractors were coming out, you know, and they were making, you know, a few $100s a week, but their student loans were paid off really quick. I mean, their school was paid off really quick, and they didn't have, again, taxes and all that kind of stuff that they were having to deal with, you know, so they were all doing very well. So the advertisements of the time were like, come become a chiropractor and make $200 a week, you know, and it was like, well, that sounds good. How much does it cost for a school? $700. Sign me up. You know, like, oh, the government's paying for it? Sign me up. You know, so they flooded into the school, and this was a big boom for chiropractic during that time. 1919, state licensing boards, they endorsed the Federation of Chiropractic Schools and Colleges 3-year and 6-month curriculum standard. Okay? So this is the point where officially the program becomes 3 years and 6 months. Guess how long it is today? About 3 years and 6 months, right? It hasn't changed. But this is what, why did they do this? Okay? Think about it. Why did they do this? Why did they go to 3 years and 6 months? It's really simple. Because how long do you think the medical doctors go to school? About the same amount. And so what was the thing that medical doctors were saying about chiropractors? Can you imagine? They were uneducated. What did chiropractors do in response? Get educated. If we're going to battle, we need to say we have the same education. Guess where it still lies today? It might surprise you, chiropractors actually have more education. We get more credit hours in the classroom than a medical doctor does. They have more time in rotations than a chiropractor does. But the reason why is pretty simple. We get into practice, we don't hurt people. I hate to say it that way, you know, but really, we don't. I mean, I've been in practice for 12 years. I don't have to go into rotations to learn how not to kill people. That sounds really harsh. But you get what I mean. I mean, you come out as a new doctor and you accidentally give somebody too much medication, they die. So you've got to learn how not to do that. And you've got to take it seriously, and it takes rotations to do that. So that's the difference. But still today, chiropractors have more education hours in the classroom than a medical doctor does.
Tons more nutrition.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they get like one class. It's also, you look at the difference in the education, we have far more physiology and anatomy, okay? They have, their #1 coursework is, I believe #1 is differential diagnosis. #2 is psychology. Why do you need that much psychology? You know, I mean, seriously, not every problem is a psychological problem, but their #2 coursework is psychology. #3 is, of course, pharmacology, you know, understanding what treatment to go with the disease that you learned as your #1 coursework. So literally the basis of the education is identify the disease and give them the treatment for the disease. You see why it works? You know, I mean, you can understand now why when you go to a doctor, they diagnose you and they give you a treatment. It's the education. You know, you go to a chiropractor, we look at you and say, what the heck is wrong with you, right? And then say, oh, well, we can't understand it anyways because we're smart enough to know that we can't figure this stuff out, so let's adjust you and watch you get well. Slightly joking, but not really, right? 1922, the American Chiropractic Association is formed to oppose Palmer and the UCA, another organization. The ACA, okay, so, but this is a different ACA than a later ACA, just so you know. So the ACA is formed because they don't like the direction that the UCA is going. So the ACA become basically the more straight, well, these guys, you know, are starting to mix. They're starting to do x-rays and all this other stuff. At that same year, BJ licenses WOC, the World of Chiropractic Radio. Okay, this is again, huge stuff. The first radio station west of the Mississippi. Like, yeah, radio. You ever see the old Al Gore, you know, back in the day when he was going against Bush, and they had the Mountain Dew ad, and they had the little elephant on one guy's shoulder and the donkey on the other, and they're both talking to the guy drinking the Mountain Dew on why they should pick him, and Al Gore, the little donkey, is like, you know, he says something about pants, and he says, I invented pants. You know, it's that kind of thing. You know, but literally, chiropractic, I mean, like, is the first adopters of some of these technologies. They didn't invent it. In fact, though I could not find it, I wish I could, so I like to actually put the names down on this stuff, but a critical component of the cell phone that actually made the cell phone available, some device within it that is actually the receiver or something of that nature, was invented, in fact, by a chiropractor. So everybody that has a cell phone in your pocket right now, you can thank a chiropractor for that. Okay? 1924, the chiropractic profession grows to about 25,000 doctors at this point. That's a lot when you consider nowadays we're still not even over about 100,000, you know, something somewhere around there. So 1924, almost 100 years ago, and it was already at 25,000. So that was a big boom. BJ opens Little Bit of Heaven. Okay, this was one of the just more fascinating components of chiropractic. You know, this gardens was built onto the Palmer mansion slash college, and the garden was known like worldwide. I mean, it was like one of the top gardens in the nation. This was a huge tourist attraction. In fact, I found a Facebook post when I was just trying to find information about it, and I found a Facebook post where people from Davenport were talking about Little Bit of Heaven, and because they're like, somebody had posted a picture of it, and people were like, "Oh, where is that? I remember that place when I was a kid, and you know, oh yeah, I went there when I was a kid. My dad took me there, and whatever happened to that place? And wasn't that owned by Palmer College or something?" And I mean, it was just funny watching this. And you know, unfortunately, the thing fell apart when after BJ died. It just really started to go downhill and everything, and it all kind of fell apart. But they have artifacts that are still held up at the Palmer College, where they're just worth tons of money because they're pulled from all over the place. They're pulled from Asia and from Europe, and you know, all of his world tours. You know, he collected these things, Buddha statues, and he even. There's one picture that I saw where he's standing in front of a big Buddha statue that was rescued off the steps of a Chinese, the Chinese emperor's palace or something before it was destroyed during one of the revolts. You know, and he's got like one of the only ones that's remaining. 1925, Wisconsin and Connecticut passed the first basic science statutes. So this is where basic sciences start coming in, saying that this is the basis of education. Within that 3 years and 9 months, or 3 years and 6 months, you have to have these basic educations: anatomy, physiology, chemistry, biology. You know, all these different things, they must be there. So you have to have all of this stuff before getting in. These are the standards of the education. 1926, BJ is not re-elected in the UCA. Okay, he doesn't get to keep his seat at the head of the castle, right? So what does he do? 1 week later, he forms a different organization that is now, still today, the International Chiropractic Association, the ICA. You guys got all the acronyms down still? You following this? Okay. So he forms the ICA. BJ also at that time opens, this is another one of those small, fascinating underlying facts that nobody knows. BJ opens a Clearview Sanitarium there in Davenport, which continues to operate until 1961. This is an insane asylum. Okay? What they did at this insane asylum was very different from what you would see at other insane asylums. See, he saw that all these people were getting put away and locked up and tortured in these other insane asylums, and he didn't like that. So he opened his own insane asylum where they got what? Chiropractic care. He got them well and released them back into normal life. And so this place continued to operate until 1961, where apparently it was because of insurance regulation and how people were paying and everything, and people that are mentally insane don't have a way of paying, and so if you can't get the dollars federally, you're out, and so they closed it down. And so now the only places that stay open are the ones that are feeding people drugs, right? So 1930s, chiropractic becomes the largest alternative healing profession in the United States. It surpasses everything else, and by far still remains at that seat today. Nobody else even comes close. Not massage therapy, not homeopathy, naturopathy. Although I do hear that Young Living consultants are catching up quickly. Okay, the National Chiropractic Association, the NCA, is formed by merging the ACA and a splinter group of the UCA. Okay, you guys got that now? You confused yet? Because most chiropractors are too, right? Nobody knows who is where and what and who believes what. But this was a pretty large group at the time. Nice convention there. 1933, Dr. Warren Salzer introduces the first upright full spine x-ray to further Logan basic technique. You know, where they look at the entire spine. You ever see those x-rays, you know, where they just take everything all at once in a standing upright position? You know, this was started back in 1933. At that time, that year also, Ronald Dutch Reagan. Anybody heard of him? Okay. He gets his first broadcasting job at Palmer-owned WAC as a sportscaster. That was his first media position. And he said of BJ Palmer, he was a great and gracious gentleman. That's one of the only things that you can see, but that's where his career officially started, and of course became president after Hollywood and everything else from there. 1935, the B.J. Palmer Research Clinic begins 30 years of published study. 30 years. He's intensely in there. In fact, it's said later that B.J. worked so hard and so long doing the research that after like 16 years of straight work without taking a day off, he checked himself into an insane asylum just to get a break. and then he came back out and went back to work again. Okay, he set the system up in 2 divisions: a medical division for diagnosis and chiropractic for treatment. So they had 2 wings, and when I say wings, I'm talking wings. This place was the size of a hospital. Okay, huge facility. You look at the old pictures, huge. Patients came from all over the world for care, and I've got a couple of different stories here. Number 1 is Dr. Charles Mayo. Anybody ever heard of the Mayo Clinic? Okay, true story. Dr. Charles Mayo, his wife got ill. Okay, and so he sent her to every medical professional he could, the best doctors around the world, trying to get his wife well. I mean, if you want to get well nowadays, where do you go? The Mayo Clinic, right? But Charles Mayo actually couldn't get his wife well. He sent her everywhere. So finally, last-ditch attempt, he goes to the one place in the world he does not want to go to. But for whatever reason, probably his wife, pleaded, let's go there. Okay, any of you wives ever have to do that with your husbands, right? Okay, so he goes with her, of course, right? And how do you think his demeanor was? Not so nice. So as soon as he comes in, he addresses Palmer as Mr. Palmer. You know, not Dr. Palmer, Mr. Palmer. You never called him Dr. Palmer. Okay? And Mr. Palmer, why do you do this? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do you do that? And BJ writes that his response finally was, Dr. Charles, why did you bring your wife to me? And he said, well, that's obvious, because she's sick and she needs to get well. And he said, that's right. And you've gone to every medical professional out there to try and get her well, and it hasn't worked. So you brought her to me. So while you're in my clinic, shut your mouth. Short, succinct, simple. Later on, after he got his wife well, you know, of course, things changed, and he started, the Palmer College started getting secret referrals from the Mayo Clinic on a regular basis until he died, until Charles Mayo died. But they got regular referrals coming in that they never knew exactly where it was coming from. But you know, the interesting thing was one little conversation within that writing that, you know, basically Dr. Mayo said, Mr. Palmer, why do you take X-rays, and why do you just, you know, adjust the spine and do nothing else and say that they're well? And he said, well, because, you know, we move the bone. God does a healing, you know, or something like that, you know, one of those chiropractic things. And Mayo says, Mr. Palmer, you're an ignorant man. And he said, and Palmer says, no, sir, you're an ignorant man, because you think that you have it all figured out, you know, and that you can heal everything. We are at least smart enough to know that, you know, we can't heal everything, you know. And so there was this little ignorant man, you know, charade that was going back and forth. But ultimately, the big picture is the Mayo Clinic director, his wife was turned to chiropractic. The second story, the electric typewriter. I told you BJ was an avid writer, okay? But it's really tedious to take out a piece of paper and sit there and write. And then BJ found that, you know, when he had to dictate stuff to his secretary, and he would sit there and he'd just be talking and talking and talking, he'd have to stop every time that she needed to pull out a piece of paper and set it aside and put a new paper in and line it up. Anybody remember the typewriter? Yes. Okay? So he went to a company, and a company that was kind of pioneering in that area, and he said, look, I need an electric typewriter that basically I can put a continuous roll in, and so that as I'm speaking, there is no pause. She can just sit there and type and type and type as long as she can go. And so that continuous dictation device was the precursor to the modern day computer. You know, that was the idea behind the keyboard. The next one, the electroencephaloneuromentograph, was created and funded by Palmer to basically detect what he said was innate intelligence, that they were reading innate intelligence. Now, of course, we know that's not true today. However, this was actually the first precursor to the modern day EEG, which is still in use today. Okay, so, but it was based on that technology. Okay. So just a couple of neat little stories there. 1936, and before I go on to that, I just want to show you, yes, BJ was a mixer. This was the PT lab within the chiropractic clinic. So they weren't just adjusting people. This place was set up unbelievably well. I mean, they had this huge rehab division, but they would have only human-powered devices, no mechanical devices. His direct thing was they must power it by their own will. He said that the only electrical device in there was actually a mechanical bull. They had a mechanical bull seat for whatever reason, but that was the only thing that was not human-powered. Okay, and then this one here, this is really cool. You guys, you know, we have the digital motion X-ray, which according to Blue Cross Blue Shield is still an investigative procedure in 2015. Yeah, this is a fluoroscopic unit being used in the Palmer Clinic. Wow. That's fluoroscopy. That's how long it's been around. Of course, I do not want to be that guy. I mean, he's got his face like right there in front of the thing, and his X-rays are literally blasting through that. He's watching the screen light up in front of him as X-rays are blasting him in the face.
But then, seriously, he's wearing glasses, right?
Yeah, but, well, he's wearing some kind of, it looks like actually a scuba diving mask, so it probably didn't work too well. 1936, anybody ever hear of Jack LaLanne? Did you know he was a chiropractor?
No.
Okay. The famous but not well-reported chiropractor Jack LaLanne opens the nation's first health and fitness club in Oakland, California. With all that we've said so far, do you see why he did not hold himself out as a chiropractor? Okay? Crystal clear. Because he would not have gotten the publicity that he did if he had. Okay? But I like this little picture here because he's got his list of things of what keep you healthy. Exercise, nutrition, positive thinking, good habits, grooming, smile, posture, help others, relaxation, and faith. Have things changed? No. You go back and you look at some of the other ones that have things that you shouldn't eat written on this black and white board there, and it's pies, cakes, candies. Nothing has changed. I mean, we're a century later, nothing's changed. So anyways, but yes, he was a chiropractor. That's where the first gym came from. So guess what? Exercise and gyms that you see all over the place, innovated by a chiropractor. Small stuff, right? You know, he's a chiropractic. It's a small thing. 1945, World War II ends, and thanks to the GI Bill legislation, enrollment again skyrockets. BJ wrote, he wished I could get a hold of Hitler's atlas so that I could give him an adjustment to make this tyrant sane. Okay? Did he have right to say that? Of course he did. He owned the sanitarium. He owned Clearview. He saw it happening. So he's like, yeah, I mean, for him, it's matter of fact, get him, give me his atlas. Let me adjust the dude. Maybe he'll become sane again. You know? What makes the insane person sane again? What makes a sane person insane? Nobody to this day has been able to figure that out, right? There's something going on, but we can see when we do this, they do this. They respond this way. We've seen the same thing here. We've had schizophrenic patients that, I mean, literally have made huge changes just by treating them as patients, you know? It's not a cure-all, though. Get that? Okay, I'm not saying it's a cure-all. Go to jail for that stuff. 1947, what is now the Council on Chiropractic Education, the CCE, Jordan, you'll get well accustomed to them, is established. Okay, 1947. 1950s, profits from penicillin, the polio vaccines, and others drive medicine to the power and virtually eliminate all homeopathic professions except for chiropractic. Everything else is gone, wiped out, because all the money is pouring in. The machine is running full speed ahead at this point. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, drugs are starting to come into play, surgeries are coming into play. It's all going, I mean, the whole thing, the tide has turned at this point. 1950s, big time. At that same time, stories like this are coming out. Winifred Gardella, the polio poster child, is cured by Lewis Robertson, D.C. Okay, so little quick story behind this. The polio poster girl, she was used in national campaigns all over the place to do what? Fundraise, right? So we need to beat polio. It's like the cancer thing today, right? You know, we need to beat polio. So we need money because we need to research, we need to understand, we need treatment, we need all this stuff. So they collected, you know, the equivalent of millions of dollars today Guess how much they paid Dr. Robertson to get her well? They didn't pay anything for her treatment. In fact, they tried for 2.5 years to get her well medically. When the parents got frustrated, the grandparents took her to Lewis Robertson, D.C., and within 6 months, she was walking on her own. And they posted pictures in the magazine of her walking, holding his hand, and riding a bike. And she maintained function the rest of her life until she died. You know, I think it was, I don't remember exactly when it was that she died. I think 1980s or so. But cool stories like that were popping up all over the place. 1956. Palmer's skeletal collection at this point grows to over 25,000 specimens. Huge. Valued at over $350,000 alone. Do you know how much that is at that time? 1950s? I mean that's millions of dollars worth of skeletons. These are not skeletons. These are swords and knives. I just wanted to kind of show you that he was an avid collector. Okay? This is a wall of ancient swords. And he collected all kinds of stuff. He was one of the world's leading scholars on caves. He traveled all over the world and saw literally every cave that was out there and lectured on the topic. So, I mean, just random stuff, but the guy was an avid thinker. That's the bottom line. He was an avid thinker and collector and everything else. 1961. B.J. Palmer dies at his winter home in Sarasota, Florida at the age of 79 from colon cancer. I did not know this before researching for the last couple of weeks until I noticed in a few pictures him sitting there holding big fat cigars. We do know that he smoked. But he died from colon cancer, and he said that it was actually, you know, he is said to have acknowledged that the reason why he got colon cancer is because he had a stubborn curve in his lumbar spine that he could never get rid of from earlier on in life. Okay, so he knew that he had degeneration, and he linked it up to that. You know, so again, this guy was enough understanding of chiropractic and the science behind it that he was linking things together. Obviously, by the time he died, 1960s, that's not that long ago. 1962, a year later, the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners, NBCE, is founded. They are still the national governing boards that do all your studies and everything today. Although the interesting thing is now Life University is pioneering a new system where instead of doing it the way that I did it in school, they're now allowing the boards to be taken online in a computer lab where you can take them whenever you want to. Like, whenever you feel like you're ready for them, you can go in and take it. And if you don't do well, you can go back and take it again. You just have to pay each time that you take them. So, pretty cool stuff. Things have come a long way. 1963, the current ACA is formed by merging the NCA and some of the ICA. Okay? So, now we're down to how many? How many do we have now? Does anybody know? This is like a riddle. Yeah, that's two. That's two. Very good. It's which ones are existent today?
ACA.
The ACA and the ICA. Okay, good. There's, I think actually there is another one though, but it's not very well known. I think there is another one though, like the internet. No, not international. I don't know. United Chiropractic. I think there's another UCA now. Anyways, whatever. Prompted by growth of chiropractic after licensure, the AMA secretly forms, this is huge, the Committee on Quackery, designed to specifically contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession according to federal court transcripts. This is probably one of the biggest turning points in chiropractic. They literally, at this point, it was all-out war. They said, we need to contain and eliminate, because if not, game over. Eventually, things will turn over and chiropractic will become the dominant healthcare system in America. So, this is where the full-out scale assault came on. 4 major points that they laid out. Number 1, ensure Medicare does not cover chiropractic. They failed on that one so far because we do get covered, but they've half won because we only get covered for what? Adjustments. 24 of them a year. 25 of them a year now. But they do not pay for anything else. No exams, no x-rays. Think about the irony behind this. They say that you can only bill for medically necessary adjustments. Well, how do we know if they're medically necessary? Because you won't pay us to do exams or x-rays to prove that they're medically necessary. So couldn't you also say that they're not medically necessary because we haven't proven it? I mean, it's redundant and ridiculous, but this is where those battles are coming from. Number 2, ensure the U.S. Office of Education does not recognize or list a chiropractic accrediting agency. They have failed on that one. Okay, there is an agency, we'll get to that. They failed on that point later. Number 3, encourage continued separation of the 2 primary national associations. They're still holding ground on that today. There is still just as much fragmentation within chiropractic as has been the entire time. Okay, there's no unity. And that's where people that look at this and read into it, they're like, this is the biggest flaw in chiropractic is you guys won't get together. You guys won't work together. There's one AMA. That's it. That's why they have power. It's like religions, right? I mean, there's 15 million religions. No wonder we can't get anything done, right? If unity, and now it's a different story, right? I mean, if you all came together, you've got a chance. Number 4, encourage state medical societies to push for laws limiting chiropractic. So now they're funding and encouraging the state levels to start pushing back as well and continue the legal battle in courts. Okay, so that really starts the vicious component of it. 1971, National College of Chiropractic achieves federally recognized accreditation, gaining CCE recognition from the U.S. Office of Education. So that's where they failed on that second point. 1972, U.S. Congress authorizes payment for Medicare patients to chiropractors. They fail on number 1, okay, but only in terms of adjustments. 1974, CCE is recognized by the U.S. Commissioner of Education. It's fully accredited, so basically now the Chiropractic Council on Education is fully covered by the government to govern chiropractic. So now they are a division that takes care of chiropractic, and the medical guys take care of medicine, but it's fully organized within the U.S. law system. Louisiana, in 1974, becomes the final state to pass the chiropractic statute. Before that time, in 1973, chiropractors were still getting arrested for practicing without a license. They were still having to practice illegally. Can you believe that? 1973. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. Life University is founded by Sid Williams, D.C. in Marietta, Georgia. It says in the background, nothing is better than life. He was a revolutionary. He was a big guy. He was one of these guys that wore suits like John Travolta and always looked like John Travolta, back in the day. So, they made a good ruckus. 1975. This was a big moment. Sore throat, which is what he's known by today because nobody still knows who it was that handed over the documents. He was an insider with the AMA, and he gained access to documents. And finally, somebody had the guts to say, you know what, this isn't right. And so he confiscated a box full of documents and handed it over to the media in the hands of a chiropractor, Louis Sportelli. Okay? And so the AMA documents went out, and it prompted, in 1976, the lawsuit Wilk versus AMA. Okay, which was it went all the way to the Supreme Court level, and the chiropractors actually won at the end of the battle, but that wasn't until later. 1987 is how long this dragged out. So for 12 years, this battle was going out in the courts, round 1. And Judge Getzendaner finds the AMA guilty in violation of the Federal Sherman Act for engaging in unlawful conspiracy and restraint of trade. Okay, so officially at that point, 1987, it becomes illegal for medical doctors and the American Medical Association to attack chiropractic and chiropractors and try to shut them out of practice. It becomes officially like, do not do it. How many of you in here have heard them still do it today? I mean, it still happens today. But unless you push back, they're going to do it. In fact, there is still a push that's doing it today, and you can see how this pans out. This is Chester Wilk here. The movie Doctored is actually getting redone. Who in here has seen Doctored? Okay, if you haven't seen Doctored, watch the film. We've got copies of it up front. But they're actually remaking the film, and they're going to release it later this year, called Undoctored. And they're removing all of the stuff about vaccines and nutrition and remaking it 100% on just chiropractic, on the history and the legal battles and everything else. So you'll really get probably the best picture of what exactly happened here watching that film. So we'll make sure that we have a viewing in the office when that comes out. But then this guy, Dr. Stephen, well, I can't even call him doctor, Stephen Barrett, he's not a doctor apparently, he lost his license, he's a psychiatrist. This guy, if you guys ever look up chiropractic online, or you look up, have you ever come across a website, quackwatch.com? Okay? Yeah, probably most of you have. and you just don't know it, but you've come across it somewhere in researching something. How is it that this little guy, you know, who is a discredited, unlicensed, multiple times sued ex-psychologist, get this website that consistently ranks #1 on Google? How does that happen, right? And it's because, you know, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that there's somebody behind Quackwatch. It's just that the system has gone underground. You know, anybody knows. I mean, you can see through the veil. There's still funding going on there because this guy doesn't have the means to just continue this battle. He doesn't make any money off the website. The money doesn't sell anything. So how does he keep going? Where is he getting these, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for legal battles that keep on coming against him? It's coming from somewhere. So, you know, that's what's still going on today. It's just, it's turned to the internet instead. And there's still trolls all over the place. 1992, the first Doctor of Physical Therapy, DPT program is established at the University of Southern California. Okay? Why is that a big point for chiropractic? It's real simple because for the longest time, chiropractic and PT, you know, have kind of been talked about as doing the same thing. Do we do the same thing? No, not even close. But see, what they've tried to do is now that the legal battle is there where they can see we're established and rooted enough that we're not going to get rid of chiropractic, what's the next thing to do? Just start doing what they do, right? Call it our own. Have you noticed on TV the medical system calling nutrition its own now? When did nutrition become a factor that medicine felt was important? Because they certainly did it back in the 1950s, right? When was it that exercise became something that medicine thought was important, or any preventative care whatsoever? It's only in recent times. So, you know, when you see that's where things are going and you're not going to win the war going, you know, fighting this battle, absorb it. Just do the same thing. And so they create the DPT program because now PTs can get paid for what? Adjustments. They can bill for the same codes. So now you have a direct competitor to chiropractic, but you've got one that you own. Make sense? Okay, so this is a big turning point. I don't really care. I mean, it's like, you know, what's still missing from a DPT? Philosophy. You know what? That's all I need. You know, if I can teach you the important factors, there's going to be a difference between a PT and a chiropractor. You know what, and the ultimate outcome, because we look at things very differently, and how, you know, the glasses you look through depends on which walls you're going to walk into, right? So 1994, the U.S. Agency for Healthcare Policy and Research recommends spinal manipulative therapy for low back pain. This is a huge monumental moment because the U.S. government acknowledges that the #1 prescribed treatment for low back pain should be adjustments. Okay, that's never happened before. 1994, they put their stamp of approval essentially on chiropractic. In that same year, digital motion x-ray gains US FDA approval. That may not be a big deal right now, okay? Because that's a whole nother story. I mean, how much money and influence has come on trying to keep that suppressed. Because this technology can redefine our industry. I mean, it can completely redefine chiropractic, but right now, most chiropractors can't afford it. So it's not a standard use. I mean, there's 2 of them in the state. So, you know, but I'm telling you, 30 years down the road, 40, 50 years down the road, this is going to be standard of care. It already is according to federal government documents. According to Medicare guidelines and disability guidelines, it already is. This is what should be used as the gold standard of care and diagnosis. We just don't know that yet. You know, most people don't. Even the courts don't know that. 2002, Life University has its accreditation temporarily removed. Why? Because they wouldn't give up philosophy. That's basically what it came down to. Okay? It was only temporarily removed and they gave it back. But my class, I graduated in 2004, right? So a lot of those students that were at Life had a mass exodus out of the school because imagine, you just paid, say, $70,000 so far into chiropractic school. Okay, so we'll point this to Dad, right? You got $70,000 on your son's loans, and all of a sudden the school he's going to lose their accreditation.
Yeah,
he can't get a job. If he graduates from that school, he does not work. What do?
A lot of faith.
Get out of Dodge, right?
Yeah.
Get out of Dodge. So most people exodus, just mass out of the school, and they, you know, a lot of them came into our class, and you know, shortly after that they gained it back, and that's a miraculous story in itself. We don't have time to get into, but you know, they literally, Dr. Reitman, the president of the school, he says it's providence. I mean, plain and simple. Like, there were multiple different things over that situation that should not have happened. Bigwigs in the city of Atlanta who had been touched by chiropractors, who planted calls and made things happen that weren't supposed to happen, and closed doors that were wide open and everything else, all because they had a chiropractic experience where they saw that it worked. And so they threw in their 2 cents when it was necessary. So pretty cool stuff. 2010, here we are. Obamacare is enacted with unexpected outcomes still coming for all healthcare professionals. This was in the news last week. Alabama's Obamacare health insurance exchange prices set to skyrocket. Did you guys see this article? Okay. They say next year, because they dramatically undercut the costs associated with the Obamacare plans, that next year in 2016, the rates of the major carriers are going to go up from anywhere, again, premiums by 30 to 70%. So you think your premiums are high now, wait until next year, right? Everything's going to go up again. This just came out literally last week. You can go and research it. So here's the thing. This is the unexpected outcome. Chiropractors have always said, you know, medical doctors get paid whatever they want to for whatever they do. Chiropractors don't get paid jack, right? You know, we have to literally build value in our patients to show, you know, what this stuff works, and if you want to get well, it's worth paying for, right? You know, I mean, that's the way it has to go. So it's like, if we just got on the fair playing field where people had a choice, go to the medical doctor and your bills are covered, or go to the chiropractor and your bills are covered, in a short period of time, where do you think most people are going to go?
To the chiropractor.
To the chiropractor. Okay, why do you think insurance was set up and formed the way that it was in the first place? It's all an owned system. Okay, it's designed to drive profits in one direction and contain the flow of money. Okay, but something unexpected happened. We were thinking we got to get up here, right? But what's happened is they've so artificially inflated this system, like another article that I just posted on Facebook last week that said that the major hospitals in the U.S. are charging north of 10 times the actual costs of patient care. I mean, your average restaurant is 3 times, right? I mean, I know because we own a restaurant now. 3 times is usually the average. And yet it's 10 times in healthcare. Not nearly as much as, I mean, pharmaceuticals some of them are 570,000 times. Literally. Costs them a fraction of a penny to make a drug that they sell for over $130 a pill. Okay? Unreal, the difference here. You know, so we were just like, you know what, if we could just get up here, fair deal. We never expected that once they would inflate the system so high that it was unattainable and unsustainable, and it would collapse back down. So now we find ourselves starting to level out this way. And now things get interesting. Because you know what? We're really good at building value. We're really good at communicating with patients. We're really good at forming relationships and understanding what it really takes to get people well and keep them well, because we've been doing it for 100 years. And they're having to learn it all. And guess what they're doing instead? Retiring. They're like, well, I don't want to do that. They're retiring. And so now what do you see? This mass exodus of doctors are leaving and retiring. They're saying that, you know, we're going to have a shortage of doctors. That's possible unless we have an abundance of chiropractors. You know, but we see some really interesting dynamics happening right now that never have come into play before. But I think it's just natural progression. It's survival of the fittest, right? 2015. I mean, everybody knows healthcare is not sustainable the way that it is. Everybody knows the medical system is not sustainable. We're not going to be doing it the way that we're doing it now, 100 years from now. We're not. So we can either, you know, keep beating the cat, or we can just, you know, be done with it. 2015. new discovery that the immune system and lymphatics are in fact controlled by the brain. Did you see this?
Yeah.
2015, we just discovered something new in the body. It has been used by medical doctors forever that, see, the brain does not control everything in the body and does not govern everything, because look at the immune system, look at the lymphatic system. They're not connected to the brain. Well, yeah, they are. We win. So, moving on. Now, chiropractic programs around the world, a current number of practicing DCs. I won't go through this entire list, but you see, there's not that many chiropractic colleges in the world. But to look at the fact that this is where it's gone, you see that history that we just laid out. You see everything that's happened and all the onslaught and stomping that's happened over the last 100 years. And look at this. We're in all the major countries starting to pop up. And there's now 75,000 chiropractors practicing in the United States. Okay? Things are changing. Things are really moving in the right direction, and we may, again, not be growing as fast as Young Living, but you know what? We're doing darn well. I think the tide is turning, okay? So where does that lead us to the future, okay? This is kind of where we wrap it all up. These are the battles that I believe we will be following and that we're going to see develop over the next 20 years, okay? And these are the things that we really have to kind of lock into and make sure that we govern and direct in the right direction, because if we don't, we lose a war, okay? This is a make or break time. There's literally articles written about this on. Number one, we need more chiropractors practicing chiropractic, okay? What I mean by that, TORS literally means door, okay, doorway, okay? Tick is, we talk about the chiropractic. Tick is a thing that makes it tick. What is that? The philosophy, okay? We can't eliminate the philosophy. There is a big drive right now for chiropractors to include drug benefits. That's happening right now, okay? They've tried to introduce this into multiple states, and luckily so far it's gotten killed. But chiropractors are lobbying to be able to prescribe drugs. And let me tell you, as soon as we do that and we're allowed to prescribe drugs, number one, we sacrifice our philosophy in doing so. You lose your identity completely. But number two, as soon as we start doing what they do, is there really any justification why they can't step in and do what we do? There's none. We have lost the war. So we at that point have no choice but to literally lay down our weapons and say, okay, we give in. Just let us become a part of you and you just tell us what to do. And then guess what we'll be doing? The same thing that osteopathic doctors are doing now. How many osteopathic doctors do you know? In comparison to chiropractors, how many do you know? There are hardly any, right? That's because they did that. They laid down their weapons and they became a part of medicine because that was the easy thing to do. They got swallowed, chiropractic survived. That's the way it went down. Number two, chiropractors will continue to see greater diversification in specialties like medicine, okay? And the reason why this is happening is simple: information. We are in an incredible time of information right now where, insight and everything else. It's like my wife, she gave me an article today, shared it to me about, kids playing Minecraft and these video games, how the researcher is saying that the kids now, something like 60% of them are going to be working in fields that currently don't exist. And so we look at these kids playing games like Minecraft and stuff like that, we see it as mindless blunder, but it's not. They're learning skills and they're learning how to build. Like we sat there and played with blocks, plastic blocks called Legos, and we're confined to the Legos that we had in hand. They have an infinite template inside of a computer that they can build anything they want to. And so you think about how information is developing and knowledge is increasing. That is showing, and there's quickly becoming just as many chiropractic techniques as there are religions, right? It is unbelievable. So the specialty is breaking off and splintering, and people are getting really good at different things, right? We practice spinal correction. That's what we love. That's what we're innovating. But, there's other doctors that love knees. I met one down in the Caymans. That's what he does, knees. Okay, there's other guys that do ART where they just work with muscles and everything else. There's a lady in town here who puts glass vials on people and tells you what you have sensitivities to and everything. I mean, there's all kinds of different things going on. So there's going to be this huge diversification and specialty formation where you're no longer going to have a GP chiropractor. You're going to know, and you're going to probably be referred from one chiropractor to another chiropractor for different things once we have enough of them. Okay? I already send out people to other chiropractors, you know, for different things. It already happens. But right now, we don't have enough, right? So we don't have those specialties there to send to. Number 3, where MDs are splintering into private practices. Have you watched that? Look at urgent care clinics. Do you see what they're doing? I mean, you really think about that? Look at how many urgent care clinics have splintered off in the last 5 years. They're everywhere now. All the doctors are leaving the hospitals and they're going up and they're opening their own private practices. So while they're going from unity and sharing of space and resources, they're splintering off into bills, like, you know, like churches do, right? How they splinter off and they open up a new building that sits there 6 days out of the week, and they, you know, and constantly need more and more and more money to keep it going, you know, and then we can't figure out why none of the churches, you know, have big budgets. Well, it's because you're all in different buildings, right? That's what they're doing, and that's what chiropractic has always done. Is I don't want to work for you. I don't want to work for you. No, I want to work by myself. No, you know, or I'm going to, you know, all this stuff, and so everybody's in their own little private practices all over the place. And nobody's working together. Okay, so while they're splintering into private practices, chiropractors must start working together to gain that market advantage that they've always had. You see that? I mean, that's why Palmer did so well in the early days. They had a huge facility. He wasn't running the whole show. He couldn't adjust an entire auditorium full of people by himself, right? But it's the power of unity and working together and coordination. But there's this, you know, this selfishness that goes along with materialism, right? And that's kind of where it's driven, why everybody wants to work on their own. Well, why would I share my profits with you, right? You know, I mean, that's literally the mentality that goes out there. So we must start working together to gain market advantage. You see this happening now where chiropractors, I was telling somebody earlier that, you know, I was being told about a chiropractor out in North Carolina who, you know, went and paid cash for a mountain house and cash for a, you know, beach house and everything because their clinic is collecting $250,000 a month. Because he's got medical doctors in there and he's got nurse practitioners in there and PTs and massage therapists and everything else. And, you know, so they run these huge clinics, you know, so that stuff can still be done. And I'd much rather see a chiropractor running what's happening there than the medical system deciding that everybody in there needs chemotherapy because it pays, right? So, so we see that stuff starting to happen. We also see it on the medical side. Have you guys seen the, what's the cancer clinic where they're starting to do nutrition, they advertise on TV? Right, so they get everybody in because it's more holistic cancer care. We give you good organic diets and exercise you and everything else. But where are they making their money? Chemo and radiation. They're getting the same profits that any other hospital do, but they're advertising themselves as homeopathic. You know, and they have one chiropractor on staff who probably isn't allowed to touch patients. So that's we're gonna see. We've got to see that start to, you know, work in terms of working together more. Okay, number 4, medicine will use DPTs in an attempt to undermine chiropractic by assuming the field when in reality there is room for all. Okay, there is plenty of room for everybody. I don't want to do what a PT does. I don't want to put electrical stim on people and you know, work with diabetics' foot, you know, so that they get feeling back in there. I don't want to do what they do. Let them continue to do what they do. Let me do what I'm good at, and let's work together. You know, that seems to make a little bit more sense, right? So we've got to see that everybody starts working together, but this is where it's going down because ultimately it's looking at it as there's not enough money to go around, and because we want a huge chunk of money, there's not enough for you. So we got to get rid of you so we can just have it all. Okay? Number 5, chiropractors will not see better insurance coverage. Not going to happen. It's going away. Okay? If anything, we'll see it completely eliminated. Okay, so it's not going to see better insurance coverage, but the good news is neither will MDs. Okay, you're not going to see us go back to the 1980s where they call it the Mercedes 80s, where everything was paid. Not going to happen. Okay, the bubble has burst officially, so fake money is not gonna continue to recur. Number 6, healthcare is unsustainable, no doubt. So as cost balance, patients will determine the market. Patients will determine the market. Okay, that's good news, because ultimately it's going to come back to that you are going to have to decide, where is your money going? Is it going into sick care? Is it going into wellness care? Is it going into medicine? Is it going into chiropractic? If you get diagnosed with cancer, does it go into lifestyle management and changing, and eating differences, or is it going to go into chemotherapy and radiation therapy? You are ultimately going to be the one that's going to pay for all that stuff. So the patients get to decide the market from this point forward, not the insurance companies. Because probably starting next year, most people aren't going to be able to afford it anymore, and they're going to start falling off. And they've already closed that gap, because now when you don't carry insurance, you get taxed more. Was that not the original intention? It was just a free tax added in there. Ultimately, we're still going to have to pay for our own health care. Number 7, chiropractic is in the balance. In the next 20 years will either boom or bust. That's the bottom line is, over the next 20 years is really going to define what happens from there. So you see from these lists, there's some big things that need to happen. We need to see more chiropractors going in. We need to see that there is more unity. We need to see a unification of the 2 major organizations and become one. We need to see that we protect the philosophy and don't become medical doctors. There's plenty of room in chiropractic. We don't need medicine. The funny thing is, see, here's the ultimate picture that I like what Guy Reitman at Life University points out, is that when you look at the mechanistic model, which means that the body is a collection of organs and everything else, you see that there's no room for chiropractic within that. Right? There's no room for chiropractic to fit inside of the medical model. It's just, it doesn't fit. Okay? It's like trying to take a peg this big and fit it into a peg this big. However, you flip it around, there is plenty of room for medical technologies to work inside of the chiropractic paradigm of the body heals itself, and that we need to support life and healing, and that ultimately it's all about protect life, maximize potential, because at some point you may need some of that stuff, and chiropractors aren't afraid to send you out for that kind of stuff when we feel you really need it. However, we're also not afraid to tell you you don't need that. Right? So there's plenty of room within the vitalistic approach for a mechanism to fit in, but not the other way around. Okay? So it's kind of like he put it in terms of physics and quantum physics. If you try to look at physics, the paradigm of physics, and fit in quantum physics, it doesn't work. Right? You cannot fit it in. So when quantum physics started becoming a field, they were like, no, it doesn't work that way. Nope, it can't work that way. It doesn't fit. There's no room for it. It must be false, yada, yada. But as they started proving more and more and more, they realized, well, it's not going away. Quantum physics is here to stay. But see, within quantum physics, it has no problem fitting in. I mean, it's just part of the puzzle. It's like we had this vision that was this big, but now it's this big, right? Everything seems to work better because the scope is widened. That's the way it is in healthcare too. The vitalistic model, it can fit all that stuff, but we've got to bring some rationality into it. So that's why I think 100 years from now, things can be different, but it depends on what we chiropractors do now. Okay? So, our vision, I'll keep it short and sweet, really is ultimately to start pioneering and developing, that kind of a system where, number one, bottom line, chiropractors, if any chiropractors are watching this video, the bottom line is stop eating our young. It's that simple. Stop eating our young. And what I mean by that, we bring out these new graduates and we cannibalize our own profession. We bring them in, and because we want to be fat cats and we want to sit on our rumps and not do anything, because you know what, we had to work hard to build this practice for 10 years. So now somebody else is going to come in here and you're going to run it. Oh, you want me to show you how I did things? No, I ain't showing you that. That's my trade secret, right? That's the way that we act. We've got all these, all these coaching programs and chiropractors. Like I got under one, when I very first started, a guy that was supposed to train me on everything and then put me into practice. The whole thing became a mess. It blew up in my face, and we had a legal battle and everything else and all this. we got to stop eating our young. You know, we've got to protect them. We've got to nurture them. Act like they're our children. I mean, I only pray that my children, if they decide to become chiropractors, that I can teach them what's necessary to be successful and take what we've done and throw them over the wall, you know? I want to see them catapulted to a whole different level of success, but we look at it like when it's not our own offspring, our own blood, that we can't do that. We got to hold it back, and instead, we're like the little kid that's like hanging on the dad's leg, you know, and you're dragging them across the ground. You know, we're doing that to these kids, and it's ridiculous. You know, so we want to see basically, you know, a model where we're not trying to leech off of and vampire our young, but instead we can create a system where we work together. You know, where we build a larger facility that they are treated fairly. They're, you know, they're paid accordingly. They don't have the stress that we had. We're utilizing resources to the best benefit. You know, instead of 5 different doctors with 5 different rents, with 5 different x-rays and 5 different DMXs and everything else, hey guys, let's get one big building and work together. We only have to have one system. I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? So that's what we want to see developed, and we want to see that, we want to literally develop a model that can now be replicated, that can be branched out from there, and we can start to show how it can be done and how everybody wins. Now, you know, I think that's half the problem, and why, you know, we'll see if ultimately that flies, because I don't think everybody ultimately wants everybody to win, because they feel like when everybody wins, I don't win, you know, and so I'm more interested in me winning than you winning. You know, it's kind of like playing video games with the kids, and they're like, you know, dancing around, I win, rubbing it in and everything, and it's like, no, you know, this isn't a competition. We're all in this together. We need to work together. Does that make sense? You know, so that's really ultimately where the direction needs to go for the profession. If we're going to change things, we need a model, and this isn't a new model. The big clinics out there, what are the big ones? I think there's a big medical institution where all the doctors are, it's a nonprofit organization, even though they collect profit, but all the doctors are paid salary. They're not paid based on the procedures that they do. It's one of the big ones. You guys would all know what it is. The Cleveland Clinic, that's it. Yeah, you know, so all the doctors are paid on salary. They don't get bonus based on the procedures that they do. Now, ultimately, do they probably get pushed by administration to do certain procedures? Maybe so. I don't know. But ultimately, it needs to be that kind of a focus, like, look, we're here for the patients. You know, we're not driven just to do what's profitable.
Driven by philosophy.
So, yeah, and they all work together, and they only bring in doctors who they know are really out to serve. You know, and you ultimately, you have to be going in with that idea, because you know you're going in and getting a pay cut. You know you don't have the ability to run your own practice. You know, so it's a special breed that goes into that system anyways. But if we can replicate that model that's already been done, you know, then let's go, let's work. I mean, it's like that's all we have to do, and we can really change the way that things are done. So that's it. You know, that's kind of where I see the direction moving in the future. But ultimately, you know, the big picture is it's really all it's in the hands of the public. It's in the hands of the population. So what you guys do, who you go to, who your friends go to, where your money is going, where your resources are directed, all of that stuff, it's all commerce. At the end of the day, it drives what ultimately happens. You guys are the market. You get to decide what that is. All right? Have a good night.